Who built the pyramids? It sounds like the safest question in the world, the kind with a settled answer waiting in every textbook and museum guide. But the moment an AI like Grok is asked that question in public, something strange happens. People are not really listening for evidence. They are listening for permission. Permission to believe the pyramids were too perfect for human hands, too massive for copper tools, too mathematically elegant for a Bronze Age kingdom standing beside the Nile. And that is why the most shocking answer is not aliens, not Atlantis, not some vanished supercivilization. The most shocking answer is the one the evidence keeps dragging us back to, again and again. Ancient Egyptians built the pyramids, and they were far more capable than modern myth has allowed them to be. To understand why that answer still unsettles people, you have to separate two different questions that are constantly being forced together. The first is who built the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza. The second is whether we fully understand every technique used to build it. Those are not the same question, and confusion begins the moment they are treated as if they are. Archaeologists can have strong evidence for the builders, while still debating logistics, ramps, stone hauling methods, labor organization, and phases of construction. Yet in the public imagination, any gap in method is treated like a gap in authorship. If we cannot explain every engineering detail to everyone's satisfaction, then somebody else must have done it. That leap is emotionally powerful, but it is not how history works. The historical case begins with Khufu himself, the 4th dynasty king the Greeks later called Cheops. In his book The Complete Pyramids, the Egyptologist Mark Lehner places the Great Pyramid within a known sequence of royal pyramid building that stretches from Djoser to Sneferu, and then to Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. You can watch the learning curve happen in stone. Djoser's step pyramid at Saqqara is not Giza yet, but it is clearly on the road there. Sneferu's projects at Mitam, Dahshur's bent pyramid, and the Red Pyramid show experiments, corrections, ambition, and technical evolution. The Great Pyramid does not appear out of nowhere like an object dropped from the sky. It stands inside a visible architectural tradition, one king after another pushing the form further, solving one problem and creating the next. That continuity matters because extraordinary monuments become less mysterious when you see the generations behind them. Ancient Egypt did not wake up one morning and improvise the largest stone monument on Earth. It spent decades, perhaps centuries, building toward it. The royal state had quarries, scribes, surveyors, boat crews, agricultural surpluses, and a sacred ideology powerful enough to mobilize labor at scale. In The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt, Toby Wilkinson describes the Old Kingdom not as a primitive society groping in the dark, but as a disciplined, centralized state with deep administrative reach. That does not make the pyramid simple. It makes it legible. Then there is the human evidence on the plateau itself. For generations, popular culture insisted the pyramids were built by slaves, usually borrowing imagery from much later stories. But excavations changed that picture. Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass helped uncover workers' settlements near Giza, complete with bakeries, barracks, cattle bones, fish remains, and signs of organized provisioning. Lehner's reports describe not a disposable slave population, but a managed labor force fed at scale by the state. Skeletal remains show injuries that healed, suggesting treatment and care rather than simple exhaustion unto death. The labor was hard, sometimes brutal, but the workers were not faceless fantasy. They were Egyptians, and they left a social footprint. One of the strongest blows against the mystery industry arrived in 2013, when papyri discovered at Wadi al-Jarf were published by Pierre Taulet. Among them was the diary of an official named Mirror, a man involved in transporting limestone by boat during Khufu's reign. Taulet and Mark Lehner later discussed how these papyri illuminate the logistics of moving fine Tura limestone to Giza. It is hard to overstate what that means. This is not a myth written 2,000 years later. It is a near-contemporary administrative voice, dry and practical, concerned with deliveries, teams, waterways, and assignments. It does not read like legend, because real construction paperwork rarely does. It reads like bureaucracy, and bureaucracy is often the sound history makes when it is telling the truth. Inside the relieving chambers above the king's chamber, there is another category of evidence that conspiracy theories tend to sidestep or dismiss. Quarry marks and gang names painted in red ochre, including references to work crews associated with Khufu. These inscriptions were noted in the 19th century and remain central to the case for attribution. They are not glamorous. They are not cinematic. But history is often secured by the unimpressive detail. A monument may inspire myth from a distance, yet a worker's mark hidden deep inside it can pull the story back to earth. So, why do people still hesitate? Because the Great Pyramid is genuinely astonishing, and astonishment creates vulnerability. Its original height of about 146.6 meters, its immense mass, its cardinal orientation, and the quality of some internal stonework produce a kind of psychological recoil. We look at the monument and assume the ancient world must have been simpler than this. When that assumption collides with the stone, many people would rather enlarge the mystery than enlarge the people who built it. The emotional logic is understandable. The factual logic is weak. Take alignment. Researchers such as I.E.S. Edwards and later surveyors noted that the pyramid sides are closely aligned to the cardinal directions. That precision is real. But real precision does not automatically imply impossible precision. Kate Spence famously argued in Nature that the Egyptians could have used circumpolar stars to establish north with impressive accuracy. Other scholars have debated her exact model, but the broader point remains. Sky-based orientation is not fantasy. A culture that watched the heavens for ritual and calendrical reasons also had reason to measure them carefully. What can seem miraculous from a modern sofa can begin to look methodical when placed back into an ancient observational culture. The same is true of stone transport. The image most people carry is absurdly crude. Men yanking giant blocks across dry desert with no planning. Yet a painting from the tomb of Jehudihotep shows a colossal statue being pulled on a sledge while a worker pours liquid in front. And a 2014 study by Daniel Bond and colleagues in Physical Review Letters demonstrated that wetting sand can reduce drag for sledges in the right conditions. That does not solve the whole pyramid by itself, but it narrows the range of mystery. Ancient builders did not need magic. They needed technique, repetition, labor coordination, and time. And time is the forgotten ingredient in nearly every modern argument about the pyramids. People compare a single construction crew on a modern site to an ancient state project, spread across years, seasons, and thousands of workers, supported by an entire economy. The Great Pyramid may have required around 2.3 million stone blocks, but many were locally quarried limestone, not exotic monoliths lifted in one impossible motion. Quarrying, dragging, levering, dressing, placing, and adjusting need not have occurred all at once. Ancient construction could be slow in ways that modern impatience barely knows how to imagine. When an AI is asked who built the pyramids, it should remember that humans with enough organization can do things that later humans, staring only at the finished result, call unbelievable. What about the claim that no tomb was ever found inside, and therefore the pyramid could not have been one? That objection sounds stronger than it is. Old Kingdom tomb robbery was a chronic reality. Absence of a surviving mummy is not absence of funerary purpose. The internal architecture of the Great Pyramid, its placement within a necropolis, its relationship to mortuary temples, boat pits, subsidiary burials, and the larger pattern of royal pyramid complexes all support its role as part of a funerary landscape. In the Oxford History of Ancient Egypt, edited by Ian Shaw, The pyramid is treated not as an isolated riddle, but as one component of royal death cult and kingship. There is also a subtler issue. Many popular videos use true facts in misleading ways. Yes, the pyramid contains mathematical relationships. Yes, some dimensions invite later numerical fascination. Yes, there are still debates about ramps and construction sequencing. But from there, sensational storytellers smuggle in conclusions the evidence does not support. They move from remarkable to impossible. From we are still studying this to history is lying. From ancient Egyptians were brilliant to ancient Egyptians were a cover story. That pattern thrives because suspicion is emotionally satisfying. It allows viewers to feel that they are seeing through a deception rather than grappling with a civilization more accomplished than expected. This is where the imagined AI answer becomes revealing. If Grok were asked honestly, without being pushed towards spectacle, the strongest responsible answer would be something like this. The pyramids of Giza were built by ancient Egyptians during the Old Kingdom, under the authority of pharaohs, including Khufu, using organized labor, skilled craftsmanship, and techniques we partly understand and are still studying in detail. That answer would disappoint people who want a secret, but it would honor the evidence. It would also expose something uncomfortable in the modern imagination. We are often less willing to credit ancient people with genius than we are willing to credit fantasy with intervention. And perhaps that is the real story beneath the story. The pyramids do not need extraterrestrials to be overwhelming. They do not need a lost machine age to be sublime. They only require us to confront the scale of human ambition when belief, power, mathematics, labor, and landscape are fused into one project. The Great Pyramid is not smaller because Egyptians built it. It is greater. It means the mind that conceived it, the hands that surveyed it, and the bodies that raised it belonged not to mythical beings, but to our own species, standing in a desert almost 45 centuries ago and deciding to make a mountain answer to a king. That is why the answer shocks people when it is stated plainly, not because it is implausible, but because it removes the comforting distance of myth. If aliens built the pyramids, then human limits remain intact. If forgotten supermen built them, then ordinary history is excused. But if Egyptians built them, then the past is not primitive in the way many modern people secretly need it to be. It becomes harder to flatter ourselves. We inherit smartphones and satellites, yet we are still staring at a monument whose makers we routinely underestimate. So when you hear someone say an AI looked at the pyramids and rejected the textbook story, ask a simple question in return. Which evidence did it reject? Mirror's diary? The worker's village? The quarry marks naming Khufu's cruise? The architectural development from earlier pyramids? The administrative state that made such projects possible? If the answer is none of those, then what has really been rejected is not the evidence, but patience. And patience is what these monuments demand. The pyramids remain mysterious in the best and most honest sense. They still challenge engineers. They still invite new surveys. They still force revisions in how we think about labor, planning, and ancient knowledge. But mystery is not a license to erase authorship. Wonder is not evidence. The builders were human beings whose names are mostly gone, except for a king's, a few crew titles, and the fading traces of officials like Mirror. Yet, in another sense, they are not gone at all. They are still present in every fitted block, every hauled stone, every measured line, every decision that turned geology into intention. The truth is not less dramatic than the fantasy. It is deeper, sadder, and far more beautiful. Human beings built the pyramids, and perhaps what shocks everyone most is how difficult that truth still is to accept. One reason the alternative stories spread so easily is that the pyramid is often discussed as though all its stones were equally difficult. They were not. Archaeologists distinguish between the rough core blocks quarried on site, the finer white casing stones brought from Tura, and the granite elements transported from Aswan. That distinction changes the scale of each problem. In practical terms, the monument was a series of different construction challenges nested inside one another, each solvable in its own way. When people say, "No one could have built this," they usually compress all of those problems into one impossible image, and history disappears inside the simplification. Experimental archaeology has also chipped away at the false boundary between possible and impossible. Researchers and builders have repeatedly shown that stone can be moved, lifted, and dressed with combinations of sledges, rollers in limited contexts, levers, ramps, copper tools, dolerite pounders, and astonishing amounts of disciplined labor. None of these demonstrations reproduces the entire Great Pyramid from foundation to apex, and serious scholars do not pretend otherwise. But they do something important. They show that many steps once described as absurd are in fact achievable. The gap that remains is not a supernatural void. It is a technical frontier, exactly the kind of frontier archaeology is supposed to investigate. Even the question of ramps is more complex than internet arguments allow. Was there a straight massive ramp, a zigzagging side ramp, an internal ramp, a set of multiple ramps used in different phases, or some hybrid approach now lost to erosion and quarrying? Scholars have proposed all of these. Jean-Pierre Houdin argued for an internal ramp hypothesis that drew enormous public attention, while other Egyptologists remained unconvinced. But disagreement here does not mean ignorance about the builders. It means the finished monument survived better than the temporary infrastructure around it. Construction methods often vanish precisely because they were never meant to last. Wooden devices decay. Mud brick ramps are robbed away. Harbors silt up. Ropes return to dust. The pyramid remains, and the scaffolding of its making largely does not. That is normal. It is not evidence of hidden beings. There is also the matter of numbers, because pyramid debates are full of them, and numbers can seduce even careful minds. A monument this large will generate ratios, correspondences, and patterns almost endlessly if enough people measure enough features and search long enough. Historians of science have warned for years against cherry-picking measurements to force later knowledge into earlier structures. The Great Pyramid can be made to speak many mathematical languages if the interpreter is free to choose which dimensions count, which reconstructed heights to use, and which tolerances to ignore. Some relationships may indeed reflect intentional design, but not every striking ratio is a message from prehistory. A disciplined investigation has to distinguish between what ancient builders demonstrably knew, what they plausibly knew, and what modern observers are projecting backward onto stone. That is why the Rhind mathematical papyrus, though later than the Great Pyramid, matters so much. Copied by the scribe Ames around 1550 BCE from older sources, it shows that Egyptian mathematics handled fractions, geometry, area problems, and practical calculation in ways suited to administration and construction. It does not turn Khufu's architects into modern mathematicians. It does something more useful. It reminds us that ancient Egyptian knowledge was technical, procedural, and sophisticated within its own frame. They did not need symbolic algebra to survey land, manage labor, or calculate volumes well enough to build ambitiously. Civilizations do not need modern notation to possess effective intelligence. The same sobriety is needed when discussing stone cutting. Granite in the King's Chamber and its relieving chambers has inspired endless claims that copper tools could never have shaped it. Yet the archaeological record includes granite working elsewhere in Egypt, stone pounders used in quarrying, and evidence of abrasion with harder materials. Dennis Stocks, in experiments in Egyptian archaeology, spent years testing how ancient tools and abrasives could work stone. His experiments did not settle every debate, but they made one thing clear. Impossibility is too strong a word. Slow, laborious, tool-intensive, and expensive are not the same as impossible. Modern audiences often confuse inconvenience with impossibility because we live inside machines that spare us the pace of handwork. Then there is the social dimension, perhaps the most underappreciated of all. The pyramid was not just an engineering act, it was a political and religious one. In ancient Egypt, kingship was bound to cosmic order, to Ma'at, to the maintenance of balance between heaven, earth, and society. A king's monument was not merely a grave marker, but part of a sacred economy linking rulership, memory, ritual, and the divine order of the world. If a modern observer asks why anyone would invest so much effort in precision, scale, and alignment for a tomb, the Egyptian answer may simply be that it was never just a tomb. It was an instrument of kingship and eternity. Once you grasp that, the monument stops looking irrationally extravagant and starts looking culturally consistent. This is the point at which the loudest alternative theories usually change the subject. Instead of asking what Old Kingdom Egyptians were capable of, they ask whether some outside intelligence might have taught them. Yet, diffusionist thinking of that kind has a long and troubled history. It has often relied, consciously or not, on the assumption that non-modern peoples could not have achieved greatness on their own. Archaeologist Sarah Parcak and many others have criticized how pseudo-archaeology strips ancient societies of agency while pretending to celebrate them. The pyramids become a stage on which modern fantasy performs its distrust of scholarship. The actual Egyptians, with their institutions, beliefs, failures, and triumphs, are pushed aside by a story more flattering to contemporary suspicion.